Whoop.
I thought I was recording this whole thing. I'm so sad because
Oh,
you
no.
were already saying so many beautiful nuggets I was going to keep.
Oh,
Oh
no,
my,
that's all right.
oh, I'm
We can say 'em
so
again.
sad.
We can say 'em again.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyways, okay. We're going to start with just talking about your definition of gaslighting. And
Mhm.
so your definition is when a person or group of people through covert behaviors convinces another person that what they think, believe, perceive, or feel is inaccurate or invalid.
Mhm. Yep.
And I just want to sit with that. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious for you, for most people, gaslighting is no longer a new word, right? So people have heard lots of definitions. Like, I'm curious for you right away, like, how does that sit with you, both of you, when you hear that versus or read that versus some of the other definitions that are out there? Like, what sticks out to you about that definition? I'm so curious.
The thing that sticks out to me is a couple of words, covert,
Mhm.
so that hidden behavior,
Mhm.
that secretive behavior, the convincing,
Mhm.
and then each of these words will think, believe, perceive, or feel
Yes.
inaccurate or invalid. And it's interesting because as a professional, as I've studied gaslighting, there are a million different definitions out there, even among
Yep.
professionals.
Yep.
And this, to me, one sentence where it's just laid out clearly takes away a lot of the confusion.
Yeah. You know what it does for me too, that I think is one of the most important things, especially with what I imagine a lot of your demographic, is it devilifies it, right? It's not so many of the definitions speak to the motive or the intention of the gaslighter. Mine doesn't do that. Mine doesn't speak to the motive or the level of awareness or the intention of the gaslighter because I believe that there's actually a broad spectrum when it comes to those things. And I actually talk about that in my free video series. And I came across that pretty early when I started working on the area of gaslighting with my clients whose partners were in recovery and they were sober and they weren't acting out, they weren't doing anything betrayal wise, but they were still doing the stupidest gaslighting behaviors, like denying that they're the ones that forgot to take out the garbage or or whatever, right? And immediately, because of this other understanding of gaslighting, they were like, my person must still be acting out. Why are they lying to me? Like, why are they like there was a connection, but I knew their partner because their partner worked with the CSAT that I was working with at the time. And I knew they were in good recovery as much as one can know that. And so I got really curious. And that's when I really started to dig in and not just accept that definition. I'm like, there has to be more to this picture and there has to be a better way to communicate it. Because also on the flip side, people were doing gaslighting behaviors, but it wasn't kind of this scary Charles Boyer persona. And so people were writing into me and being like, hey, I think I'm being gaslit. But then I go and I read these articles where it's talking about psychological abuse and narcissists and all of these, all of these things. And my person doesn't quite fit that, but I'm seeing all of these other. So am I being gaslit or am I not? And so all of these definitions and ways that people were talking about it were leading to more confusion, not answers. And that wasn't okay with me. I had this driving almost sense of urgency of I know this is important. It was so important in my own personal journey. I know this is important. I need to help other people. I need to make this clear. I need to make this understandable. I need to make it easy to remember because trauma brain can't remember things. Right. Like, so I was driven. I was definitely driven. So that really makes me happy to hear that you feel it's like concise and easy to understand. And I think, you highlighted the points that to me, I hope stick out to people when they read it.
well, and
You've
for me, when I read that definition, it gives me validation for my lived experience when I read the part of what I had thought, what I
Yep.
believed to be true, what I perceived to be real, and what
Yeah.
I felt was
Yes.
authentic was totally based on a false reality. And so it validates my experience through being gaslit.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that too, because I think when we talk about my perception of reality. Okay, so, well, what does that mean? Right? Because so many definitions, that's what they say. The goal is to control the other person's perception. Okay, but how do I know when that's happening? Like, help me understand what that means, right? So teasing it out that way, the way I kind of, I'm a huge math and science nerd. Those were my favorite subjects in school, and so that's kind of brain I approached this material with. And the way that I try to explain to people what gaslighting is like to me is like water, right? Because, that's one of the easiest things that most of us remember, the chemistry, the H2O, right? Like we know that's two parts hydrogen, one part oxygen, right? It's not just one thing to make up water. And it also presents differently in different circumstances. If we were at the South Pole, water would be frozen, right? I'm in Texas, water is in the air incredibly because it's humid. It presents in different ways. If we put it on the stove, it boils and it evaporates. It's still parts water, right? So it presents differently in different situations. And so we can get curious instead of just trying to slap a label on it real quick and not fully understand it. So, but we got to tease it out, right? We got to tease it out and look at the individual components to really be able to get familiar with it. So that's what I've been doing for the past decade. is getting familiar with all the moving parts.
Yeah, and doing it very, very well.
Thank
So,
you. I've been
um,
trying. I
really,
promise.
really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Alana, I don't know if you have any follow-up questions to that, but what I'm thinking is, and what came to mind, Sarah, as I was preparing to talk
Mhm.
to you was, and what I believe a lot of our listeners are wondering, it goes along with, I think, week 9 of your course, is
Okay.
that taking, what does it take for the
Yes.
relationship to heal when there has been
Yes.
chronic gaslighting? But something that came up for me that I think is also equally helpful is, okay, if I know that's been going on chronically,
Mhm. Mhm.
is it possible to heal? Are they capable? Really, is there hope?
Yeah.
There hope after?
I mean, I'm happy to go there. Or if Lana, if you want to go somewhere else first, I mean, we can like jump around. I'm happy, whatever feels best and for you.
Well, it's interesting because where my brain is going is, Sarah, you said, I'm going to bring both of your stuff in, but
Yeah.
Sarah, you said at the beginning that there is this common knowledge now of gaslighting. I even
Hmm.
think like the Dixie Chicks, I think they have a new name,
Hmm.
the Chicks, that they have a
Hmm.
gaslighting song, and this
Hmm.
is almost become a pop culture term. So we
Oh,
have
for sure.
lots of talk around gaslighting. But it's interesting because I remember when abuse started becoming more common, it was
Mm.
either this once an abuser, always an abuser, and once a gaslighter, are they always a gaslighter? Then
Mhm.
along with that is if gaslighting is happening like post D-Day or once they're in
Mhm.
recovery, it's happening. I'm glad you
Yeah.
highlighted that because I have a few clients that are coming to mind that
Yeah.
basically, and it's not even he's not in recovery, it's well, yeah, it is. But it's not he's going through
Mhm.
those secretive behaviors, but it's he's gaslighting, so he's not in recovery and he will never
Mhm.
be. So I think
Yeah.
what you're saying, Amy, is the predominant question that I
Yeah.
see come up with people is just tell me, like, can this actually be weeded out or is it too bred into is not the right word. Is it too in depth of who they are and how they communicate and how they think?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and we can totally touch on it here. And I go in depth in this in my video series. I think this is such important information I give it away for free, right? There's some things I don't because, got to put food on the table, but there's a lot that I give away for free. I'm here to raise the level of awareness, right? Like I want to make a great impact in this world. And this is a big, huge part of understanding this, right? Now, what has happened, what you're talking about is what has happened over the years. The same way narcissist and narcissism became a buzzword, the same thing has happened with gaslighter, and the two have become interchangeable. And that's not okay. Yes, I believe gaslighting is a narcissist's favorite tool. I do. Right? Like, and I think that's partially why it has happened. But I've been in forums where people will ask a question, can my gaslighter change? And somebody who thinks they know the answer responds and says, no, because narcissists can't change. Right. And I'm like, the question wasn't about a narcissist. The question was about somebody doing gaslighting behavior. And that's why in my definition, I say a person or a group of people who do covert behaviors. right? Like
Separating.
that's part of the equation, right? And there are so many different reasons why somebody might do a covert behavior. And covert basically just means hidden. That's all it means, right? Like,
Right.
because on the flip side, with the convincing thing, if you and I are having a conversation, and even if it's heated because I'm upset, that doesn't mean I'm gaslighting you, right? If I don't resort to manipulation or coercion, if I'm just impassioned and disagreeing with you, I am not gaslighting you, right? Maybe I'm being a little bit of a jerk. I'm like trying to be mindful of my language in y'all's podcast because it probably is a different word there, but maybe I'm being a little bit of a jerk, but I might not be. That doesn't mean I'm gaslighting you, right? I have to do a hidden behavior, and I go into depth in those in my course. But for example, coercion, I already named, manipulation, lying are three of them. They're three of some of the most common, right, that we see in gaslighting behaviors. So somebody, however, I'm going to give you a great example that we just named, the addict that is in recovery, even if it's messy recovery. They're no longer acting out in any way, but their shame core is still really huge, right? So the thing that we have to understand is the defense mechanisms around shame take a while to unpack and rewire. They're automatic. They're an automatic protection mechanism because that feeling of shame is so intolerable. They used to act out. Now they're not acting out, but they still feel the shame. So what do? Well, I can't feel this shame. And this happens lightning quick, right? Lightning quick because it's an automatic defense. And so they make it be about somebody else. Doesn't matter if it's the dog. Somebody else is going to be to blame for what just happened, not me. Right. Now, that's not okay for relational repair. That relational repair cannot happen when that continues to happen. However, what I have seen in my decade of coaching clients is the distinction between I'm going to give three different examples. The person who's faking recovery, the person who's sober, we're going to make a distinction between sobriety and authentic, holistic recovery. Okay. And then the person who is in authentic, holistic recovery. There's three different things happening here. Okay. So the first one, they're faking it. For me, that person, they're still doing gaslighting behaviors. I mean, that's a no-brainer. They're still acting out, and that's why they're doing the gaslighting behaviors. And that's something takes a long time to go into some of the things that we can do so that we don't get sucked into the gaslighting and they only become attempts. That to me is the convinces part. That word is a very empowering part of the definition for me. Because if I can learn how to listen to my gut, even if my head is saying that doesn't make sense, but my gut is saying, wait a second, I'm going to trust my gut and not only listen to my head, then maybe I'm not going to convince to not follow my gut, right? That's a whole nother thing. So that's person one. Person two, we're going to focus on, which is those they're sober, but maybe they're a narcissist, right? I've seen this happen time and time again where they've been sober a year, 2 years. And since you said I can swear, they'll be like, why is my person still an asshole? I'm like, well, because they're not you've taken away the acting out and they've been sober for a year and they've got their 1 year chip and they think they've crossed the finish line because they're not actually concerned about relational repair. They're concerned about image management. They're concerned about looking like the good guy. They're concerned about going to the meetings and flashing their 1 year chip. They're not concerned about relational repair with you. Right. So that's a different motive or reason to do gaslighting behaviors. They don't think the true narcissist actually believes that they're right. So they're going to try to gaslight you to believe the same as them. Right. That's a different motive. And then you've got the person who's in that place. They're trying, but they are unaware that they are doing these behaviors because it's an automatic defense response to their shame. And what I have seen with those people is they will do the gaslighting. The more they work on themselves, the more they heal that shame core in their therapy, in their treatment program, in whatever they're doing, what will happen is they will begin to increase in their self-awareness. And as they do so, the gaslighting behaviors that were still lingering, right? Because usually there's gaslighting behaviors that they do when they're acting out and they have their secret life that fall off when they enter sobriety. Those go. It's the other ones that still stay. over time, if someone is truly in authentic recovery, holistic recovery, and they're working on themselves, those things start to fall off. Sometimes naturally, sometimes with intention, right? If I don't feel so much shame, I'm not going to respond with gaslighting as much from my shame defense, right? I still might have some patterns, some habits that I picked up from my family of origin, different things. I believe one of the reasons for gaslighting that happens is because of difference of communication styles or really ineffective, poor communication styles. I had a workshop attendee once when I used to do workshops said, my therapist said that I'm not being gaslit, that my husband just has poor communication. And I'm like, but the poor communication is causing gaslighting. Like that wasn't that what she told you wasn't accurate. So it's not always malicious. It's not always with an intent to intentionally hide things or control the other person. Doesn't mean it's okay. Those aren't good, healthy reasons. And you probably don't want to stay in a relationship with somebody if they can't stop doing that and learn how to rewire those things and heal their shame core, because that's not going to stop if they don't. Does that answer your question? You said I could just go for it and geek out. So does
Yeah,
that,
no,
do you feel like that address?
so good. And as you're talking about these three different parts, that unaware part, I think
Mm-hmm.
going back to when people go and research this on their own, gaslighting is a type of emotional abuse. And so
Mm-hmm.
then our definition often of abuse is the abuser is intentional and they know what they're doing. And so that can
Yeah.
be really confusing
Yeah.
and it can add extra trauma or pain when we really do have these people who are unintentionally and completely unaware that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And it throws both of them into this category that does not fit. So I just highlighting that needing for that self-awareness. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And, I think for me, it's such an important thing. Back in the day, I read one of Lindy Bancroft's book, Why Does He Do That? I don't know if y'all have read it. It's a great book, and he really differentiated for me the difference between somebody who is an abuser and has an abusive mindset versus somebody who is doing abusive behaviors, right? But
Yes.
they don't necessarily have an abusive mindset. Again, that goes back to me, that person who's like they can check all the boxes, but they still have an abusive mindset. So it's like who did I somebody I was listening to the other day talked about putting icing on poop, basically, right? Like it's still a piece of poop, right? Like you're not going to want to eat it because it has icing on it. It's like someone who is an abuser with an abusive mindset, it's kind of like when you just scratch a little bit under the surface, you can tell the difference, right? Like one of the things I really had to sit with understanding, and I don't know how much y'all know my story. It's out there. It's on my own podcast, but I don't have an official diagnosis, but many, many, many people that I trust and believe in agree that I was probably married to a sociopath in my first marriage. Let me differentiate there. And one of the things had to really sit with because he was the poster boy for everything. Everybody loved him. Even when he went to prison, people would come up to me in the waiting room when I would go to visit him because I was being the good little wife that I was supposed to be, right? Be like, you're so and so's wife, right? He's so amazing. He's helped me it carried on. But for me, it's like you just scratch, like there was always something that didn't sit right. There wasn't depth to the words of "I see your trauma." There was a shallowness to it, right? So when we're talking about gaslighting and we're talking about these people that don't change, right? We're talking about authentic change that is consistent, that you feel in your head, your heart, and your gut. We've got to learn as women. We've been so gaslit to not check into our body. Our bodies are not safe. We're a stumbling block for people and like all our bodies have been made to be something that we can't trust. And yet it presents so much information to us, especially when we're trying to get out of gaslighting is what is my body feeling in this situation? Right? Like learning how to check in with those different parts of ourselves. But to me, I really do. I think there is a clear difference. And I have a powerful analogy that I talk about a broken arm and the difference between somebody who pushes you and causes a broken arm and doesn't actually overtly abusive thing and somebody who trips and falls into you and creates a broken arm. both result in a broken arm. But to me, that's like the epitome of the difference between an abuser and somebody who unintentionally does something because of their mess. They tripped over their own mess. They're not like necessarily innocent, but there's such a stark difference between someone who thinks it's okay to push because they're upset. And I can just do that because, well, I didn't kick you, right? Like all I did was push you. That's an abuser mindset, right? Versus somebody who's like, crap, I didn't think my mess would hurt anybody else. And look at me tripping over my mess every damn day and causing you more and more pain. There's a very big difference. And what we have done is we put gaslighting into the first category only, and it's ostracized a lot of partners. It's condemned a lot of our essays or people that do gaslighting behaviors to feel like more shame. I'm not being like poor them, but how am I going to get curious about a behavior that I do that if I say I admit to it, I'm like that?
Mm.
Right? Because I work with guys that want to stop gaslighting. I do that work too. And there's some humans that really realize that the mess that they made is bad and they want to change desperately. And it's been so brave of them to say, you know what, despite the stigma that is out there about people that gaslight, I want to stop this behavior because I love my person and I want to treat them the way they deserve to be treated. And this other stuff is not acceptable on any level.
Well, and
That's
just
speaking to
hearing
the
you
weakness.
say that,
Yeah.
just hearing you say that response, right? It falls into that holistic recovery mindset. That's what I
100%.
feel like a lot of women aren't hearing.
Yep.
And that's where I would love here's where I'm feeling like, just knowing a lot of our listeners, and Alana, I want to know what
Yeah.
your thoughts are. But a lot of our listeners get hung up in this right here of, so is it possible for them to change? And so now I feel like they're going to go to, okay, well, if it's not possible for them to change, then that means they're the narcissist type.
Could
And
be.
so they're like, now they're like trying to figure out, okay, so do they have the gaslighting that's with the narcissist or do they have the gaslighting that's with and that's why I think this gets so confusing is because they're
Yes,
still
agreed.
trying to figure out this person. And I think and I'd love to know your response to this, but when I see women trying to figure all of this out, which I'm not discouraging,
Mhm.
but I also think that there's just so much value in taking a step back of trying to figure it out and figure out where
Mhm.
they fall in line in all of this and get
Mhm.
back to you. Because one of the, at least my own
Mm.
experience, devastating parts of this is the gaslighting that's associated with the betrayal, the
Mhm.
and my response to the betrayal
Mhm.
and how that completely just took me out of whack of my sense of self. And then
Yeah.
in my out of whack sense of self, I'm trying to figure out a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that I think is where where a lot of women are getting stuck. So I don't
Yes.
know. I don't know what you think about that, but
Can I ask you to do something, Sarah, around this? Because you said this
Yes.
fast, and I would love for you to slow this down because I
Yeah.
think it touches on what you're talking about, Amy. You said head, heart, and gut. And Amy
Yes.
and I have done enough individual work that we can go like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah,
would you
yeah.
slow that down for our
Uh-huh.
listeners and just talk about learning how to access or tap in and become aware of each of those parts?
Sure. It's crucial. Listen, I was so gaslit over the course of I'm going to call it a 19-year marriage. The last few years were a joke, but in all, it was 19 years. Discovery was about 14 and a half years in for me. My sense of self had been so chipped away, right? Like everything from my confidence, it wasn't just about his hidden secret deviant life, right? That was so well hidden, I didn't even know. Like nothing, not even a clue. Never had a single like dripping discovery. It was the FBI walking into my life that, right? Like it was that level for me. But I lost so much of myself. So I'm not trying to say, oh, it's easy, just do this, right? Like, no, that was a hard fought battle. And probably for 2 years of my life, like, I'm not kidding, after I divorced my ex, probably for 2 years of my life, one of the things I said to myself the most constantly was let me check in with myself. Let me check in with myself. Let me check in with myself. My whole world was so blown up. I gave myself permission to question every and anything that had ever come my way. Didn't matter who had said it. My mom, who I adore, right, is one of my besties. And I think at least one of you know who my mom is, right? Like she's an amazing individual, even her, right? The religion that I grew up with, what I believe about what's right and what's like every little thing, what I believed if I really loved my long hair, which I do, like every little thing, like I wanted to know, let me check in with myself, not what anybody else thinks about this. Like, and then not just myself, but again, when we tease those things out, like we said with reality, when we tease, what does it mean to check in with myself? Okay, well, I'm going to check in with my head. Well, what does that mean with my head? Now, when we talk about checking with our head, understanding the easiest way to understand our head, heart, and gut is to think about the roles that they play in our life. Our head is our protector. Its job is to protect us. So it's the thing that future trips. It's the what ifs, right? It's the fear. It's all of those kinds of things, the risk reward. It's all our head, right? And we pay attention to it, right? I love that recent episode when we talked about not letting feelings drive our car. I don't think we let any one of these drive the car exclusively. I think we let them take turns. Right? Like I'm gonna let my brain get in the driver's seat for a little bit as far as like let them, maybe a better analogy is letting them have the floor. Like my head's gonna speak here for a little bit. What is my head saying? And I'm gonna take note. And I think it's especially important with my lens of gaslighting. It's really getting curious and saying, okay, I'm feeling like this is a risk, but do I actually think that it's a risk? Or do I think it's a risk because my dad was always telling me, be careful, you're going to get hurt? Right? Like, is that actually my voice or is it somebody else's voice that's causing me to think this way? Then seeking into our heart is our connector, right? So when we're longing for that connection with another person, even with ourselves, like that when we're struggling to disconnect, right? Like thinking, okay, well, what is my heart saying? My heart is saying that I'm afraid if I disconnect from this friend, this person, I'm never going to feel this way again, whatever. Like, what is my heart? What is my connector piece saying? And when we talk about our gut, it's our reactor. Its whole job is to not think, it's just to react. This is good. This is bad. Yes, no. It's like the Neanderthal part. Yes, no. Right. It really, and when we're looking and trying to figure out what is my gut saying, try to differentiate because we can mistake fear for our gut. Fear is usually an indicator of our protector. When we're connecting with our gut, we're usually going to say things like, I don't know why, but because it's not about logic. It's about those science has proven how many different dimensions we have in this world, and our body is more connected to them than our brain is. And so we can sense things that we can't necessarily see or logic, right? And I love, this is where I always bring in the Vicky Tidwell Palmer thing where she talks about especially as women, we typically don't trust our gut and look for evidence to prove that it's right. And she says to flip that, trust your gut, but we're not perfect. So allow it to be proven wrong, but don't flip that. Don't doubt it. And then make sure like, oh, like I'm probably wrong though. Like, no, trust that bitch. Like she's got it. Like let her, and it's okay if we mess up every once in a while, but at least like learn to trust yourself first. And I liken it to a pie chart, right? You know, those little circle pie charts. And who am I going to trust in any given situation? At least half of that pie chart should be us. Then the rest, it's not like we don't trust anybody else. We don't want to err and go to the other side of the ditch, right? But we want to be really intentional as how much of my trust am I giving away when firstly I should be going to that half of the pie chart that is about me and what my gut says. So when I'm talking about checking in with head, heart, and gut, I would check in and I'd say, what do I want for breakfast? Well, my head is saying I should probably have this because I'm trying to be fit. And my heart says, well, my heart doesn't really care. And then my gut says, or whatever, my body says, right? Like checking in as many different situations as I possibly could, especially easy ones, quote unquote, easy, right? It's hard to start with the big
non-emotionally
decisions.
charged. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. What
Yeah.
do I want to watch for TV tonight? Like, Am I going to watch Netflix? Am I going to read a book? Let me check in with myself. I'm not just going to go with what I've always done. I'm not going to go necessarily with what my partner wants to do or whatever. I'm at least going to check in. I might still do what my partner wants to do, but I'm going to make sure I'm checking in with myself and knowing what my thoughts and feelings are on this.
Yeah.
That's
I
one of the
think
most
that's so
important things.
critical. I just feel like that's so critical because, again, there are so many definitions, there's so many voices out
Yep.
there, which I'm grateful for, and I'm grateful to be a part of those voices that are out there.
Yep.
But I see so many women gaslighting themselves,
100%.
right? And so I just
Yep.
love what you're saying there, and I think that is, if anything you get out of this, it's just going back to that. And so if you're having a hard time knowing where your partner is in those 3 areas that you described, I just want to encourage our listeners to go back and practice what you're offering right there. I think
Yeah.
that's really important.
And one of the things I would love to say to that too is if you're struggling, because I think it's normal, our brain wants to categorize things. It wants to put names, it wants to put labels onto things. And so if you're struggling, I don't know if my person is a true narcissist or if these things are tendencies that will diminish over time. And in the meantime, I can only take so much, right? And that's the struggle. And I think one of the most loving things I did for my own journey was when I gave myself permission to make a decision because it was a big decision and understand and name I was in a season of gathering information,
Mm.
Yes.
right? That kind of depersonalizes it and puts that detachment piece in where I'm not committing to anything. I don't have enough information right now to make a decision about whether or not my person is safe. So I'm going to go into a season of information gathering about them. And in the meantime, I know you said you want to do a podcast on boundaries. That is one of the most important things we can do is understand how do I keep myself safe while I'm gathering this information, right? And that goes to your point where for me, it's why I built my course the way I did, where it's 50-50. The focus is not all about the gaslighter. That's the first third. The second third is about us. What makes me vulnerable to gaslighting so that if my
Yes.
person is still doing gaslighting behaviors, that convince part changes. It's now no longer, I can go from saying, and usually, after an experience happens, like, wow, I was gaslit, right? To in the moment, that's a gaslighting attempt. I recognize what is happening here and I don't have to lose my knowing. I don't have to unknowingly discard my truth and take on theirs because that's what we do when gaslighting happens. We unknowingly discard our own truth and take on somebody else's as our own. I
Mhm.
describe it to people, it'd be like walking around in shoes that are 2 sizes too small. That's what being gaslit feels like, right? Like it's not you. This doesn't belong, it doesn't fit right. It just never feels quite right. It feels oppressive. It feels restricting,
Yeah.
right? And so we can learn how to do that. And then that helps us if we're safe enough to where we're not getting gaslit, it's just attempts. We're in a safe enough place where we can now notice whether or not their gaslighting is changing and how. Because I'll guarantee you, I've seen it. I've seen it as I want to say every time. I might not. You generally try not to say always or every, but when a person starts coming into their power and is not being able to be controlled by their gaslighter, one of 2 things happens. The gaslighter ups their gaslighting. They start doing different tactics. They start exerting their power even more and doing stuff where you're like, who is this person? I did not know they were this crazy. That's one thing that's happening with one of my clients right now. And I just feel so strongly, badly for her. Or the other person is like, oh, this is different. I wonder what's going on, right? Maybe I need to work on myself a little bit more. Like feels different. And maybe I can do things different too. Like that usually takes a little bit of time, but it's not usually an immediate, I'm going to step up my game. It's more of a I'm confused. This is different. The dance has just changed.
Mhm.
And then that provides an opportunity for some self-awareness, right?
Mhm.
But yeah,
Yep.
no, I think for me, the solution isn't getting more educated about the gaslighter. It's important, but it's important in as much as to help us empower ourselves so we're not sucked in. It's not to be able to identify what's happening in them or label them one way or another. It's in order for us to be empowered and step out of range of the gaslighting and quite honestly to be able to raise our bar in relationships.
Yes, and require that mutuality in learning about this, not you learning
And
about it and teaching them.
100%. That's probably my top value in relationships is mutuality.
Yep.
Yep.
That's such a beautiful word. One thing that did cross my mind is there is a big fear that comes up for some women of when they heard what you just said there, that there is a potential that it could get worse or could
Yep.
change. And they're in this place of, Sarah, don't say this. Like, I'm already at my limit. I can't handle more.
Yeah.
What if it happens? What advice do you give women who are in just that place of almost freeze or panic because doing anything could potentially escalate it?
Yeah. So not trying to plug my stuff.
You plug
And
away, plug away.
at the same time, one of my offerings that I created is specifically for that kind of a situation. It's called Deconstructing Gaslighting Conversations because the mistake is thinking that I have to vocalize these new awarenesses that I'm having, and you don't. Right? Like if you're afraid of something escalating, I can't guarantee in any of the work that I do that it's going to change your partner. What I can guarantee is helping you to not lose yourself. That's what I can guarantee. And I've had plenty of clients who had to play nice, and it doesn't feel good because we're having to operate outside of who we would be if we were free to be us in a safe, healthy relationship. But we're not in a safe, healthy relationship. So we're not free to be us. And so it feels inauthentic to us to have to guard our safety that strongly with somebody that we're supposed to be able to trust. So it feels really weird, right? But it's appropriate and it's valid. So what we learn to do is recognize the things, but we might just say something like, I'm going to have to think about what you just said. It's not confrontative. It's not saying, yo, buddy, you just totally tried to gaslight me and you're being a super big jerk right now. We don't have to do any of that. We can learn how to have conversations with our gaslighters because even if we end the relationship, I have plenty of clients who divorce their person and still have to interact with them because they're parallel parenting with them. Right. And they know that every time they have a conversation with them, they're going to try some sort of crazy gaslighting stuff. And that varies. I've seen some ridiculous stuff in my years. And so, again, the goal is not to have a certain outcome in the conversation. The goal is I'm going to be able to walk away from that conversation, not doubting myself, not doubting my values, not doubting my boundaries, not right. Like I am secure in knowing who I am. That's the goal, right? That's how we
Yes.
prevent gaslighting from happening. We can't stop the other stuff. We can't force a person to stop doing gaslighting behaviors, but we can stop that other piece. Per my definition, it's a covert behavior. Those covert behaviors don't have to stop, but I do have agency when it comes to the convincing part.
Yeah.
And not making yourself vulnerable to that anymore, and understanding how you become vulnerable to that is really key, and
I mean,
your
it's so key.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And to me, it's not a shaming thing at all. Like one of the biggest things that makes people vulnerable to gaslighting is having high empathy. And that's a beautiful thing in a safe context. So
exactly.
that's where that boundaries place comes in. How do I boundary appropriately my empathy so that I'm not shutting down this beautiful, amazing gift that I have? It's my sacred self responsibility to protect it. It's not a shameful thing at all. And I need to see it for what it is, or I will continue to be vulnerable no matter who I'm with.
Yeah,
It will repeat in multiple relationships.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want
So,
everything that you just said there for every single one of my clients.
mm,
It's just beautiful.
yeah. As I was walking, I was going for a walk this morning. I wanted to make sure, and whatever other questions that we have, I want to make sure I wanted to point out something. And I don't think I've done, I've been on a number of podcasts. whatever. I try to bring new stuff in case people have heard me before. And one of the things I've been really excited about trying to help people understand lately about recognizing gaslighting. What's a tip, the tool, right? Like that I could give right now that your listeners could start to implement right away. And there were two things that I wanted to highlight. One is not getting so fixated on these lists that they're Instagram like happy, because honestly, a lot of what is in gaslighting is understanding the nuances of what's actually not said, but inferred, and then also the context of the pattern. So, for example, the simple phrase of, I'm sorry you felt that way. I've seen that popping up on lists of that's what gaslighting sounds like. And context in that situation is everything, right? If I am in a place where I am overwhelmed and I don't have very much capacity and my partner is hurting and I say, I'm sorry you felt that way, and there's not a lot of empathy in it, it doesn't mean I don't mean it. It means I might be struggling with my own capacity in that moment. That's one way that could be said. I could say it and I could be being gaslighting. Well, sorry you feel that way. I didn't have anything to do with presenting an opportunity for you to feel that way, whatever. Like basically, good, whatever. Right. That's a gaslighty way to use that phrase. Or it could be, wow, I'm really sorry that you feel that way. And that could be full of empathy. So these one liners, like if something doesn't sit right with you, just get curious, check in with yourself. But the biggest thing that I wanted to point out about understanding, trying to recognize gaslighting as it's happening. And I know y'all talk pretty clinically in your podcast, right? From what I've gathered, will your listeners be familiar with cognitive dissonance?
I think we get enough new listeners regularly. It would be good
Okay.
if you quick definition.
Okay. So I'm going to talk for a hot second about why gaslighting causes cognitive dissonance and what that means. Cognitive dissonance is when we hold two opposing beliefs or values so strongly that we basically end up at an impasse. And we can only stay in that place for so long before we're going to choose one or the other. We have to, or we go crazy, basically. Right. So gaslighting, more often than not, causes cognitive dissonance the more it happens. Okay. So the first time somebody might gaslight you about something, it probably just causes a little bit of confusion and maybe some insecurity or self doubt. But the more that keeps happening, the more you're like, well, geez, like they're not letting go of this thing, and they're an important person. And they say that they're supposed to, I believe that they love me and they have the best intentions for me, but this doesn't feel good to me. Like, I don't feel like this is how I really am or whatever. So it's typically a cognitive dissonance between us holding on to ourselves or the relationship, whether it's a boss, friend, intimate partner, family member. And it creates that cognitive dissonance because I have to choose between myself or the other person in the relationship. And it's not a conscious choice. And then you've got these, what's the word? I can't even think of it now. The hidden behaviors, right? Like it's not in our face that we have this choice. These hidden behaviors are causing us to question these things. And so when you find yourself in this place where you just feel like you're super struggling between knowing what to think or believe or feel about something, and it's just not sitting right, and you feel like you're feeling agitated and anxious and all of these things that cognitive dissonance causes, like take a pause, take a step back, and just try to check in with yourself. What are my thoughts about this? One of my favorite phrases that I give to my clients is, if I were free to be me, if I were free to be me, what would my thought be about this? If I were free to be me, how would I feel about this? If I wasn't worried about what mom and dad would think, if I wasn't worried about, if I were just free to be me in this moment, what would I want? What would I ask for? What would I expect? How would I feel? What boundary would I put in place? Et cetera, right? And that more often than not helps us stay out of what is basically self-abandoning. Because when the gaslighting has happened, more often than not, we're gonna go that way of self-abandoning. And I could go for a long time about that, but more often than not, again, that's because I can fix me. I can change me. My person isn't changing. They're not changing their viewpoint, but I can change mine.
Yep.
So if I am the problem, if I agree with them that I am the problem, then I can fix that. And all of this drama and all of this horrible experiences can just go away, and we can get back to that happy stage that we were in at the beginning before all this happened. So keep an eye out for that cognitive dissonance.
Thank you for highlighting that piece. And I wrote this down. You've given me a few nuggets that
Mm,
I love, that if I were free to be me, or let me check in with myself,
yeah.
these little affirmations that are so empowering. And just a reminder to our listeners, the
Yeah.
affirmation, and you can incorporate these on a daily and more often throughout the day basis, it really does start rewiring our brain.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
Well, and
Thank
something
you.
else that I've noticed that came up several times in the conversation that I also want to highlight is being in charge of you recognizing the patterns that you're experiencing in those interactions with them. Check in with yourself before a conversation if you can.
Yep.
What are my emotions? And this is going to help with that empath type of personality. But
Yep.
what are my emotions? What am I experiencing? What did I experience in that conversation? What am I experiencing post that conversation?
Hmm.
And when you can start to recognize some of those patterns that you can go back to,
Hmm.
even if it's a, this is what I experienced. I heard this, I said this,
Hmm.
because what happens often and what's part of my story is that the next day, a week, a month, whatever, that conversation now is being used against you and twisted and distorted.
Yep. Yep.
And so having a notebook and having a place where you can go back and remind yourself of your truth is also something
Yeah.
that I would really suggest can be valuable to help you identify if this is perpetuating or not.
Yeah. And I would even take that one step further. And that part of the whole, like, my whole goal is helping people identify the patterns, right? On the gaslighting side and then on your side, right? And together it makes up this flow chart of a gaslighting experience, right? And so what's even more helpful and what I found for me, and I think probably both of y'all and a lot of your listeners would relate to, is because we've been so gaslit, we don't trust ourselves. That's the most heinous part of gaslighting. So even as we're writing this stuff down, we think to ourselves, am I wrong? Is my
Mhm.
perception wrong? Is it valid for me to think or feel this way? What if it is my perception that is right? And so when we actually are able to have someone come along and say, this thing that happened right there, that was breadcrumbing. This thing that happened right there, that was mirroring. This thing that happened right there was Darvo, right? Like all of these names, so that you're not just saying, well, I don't know what happened, but it just didn't feel good when you said this. It's like, no, what you said right there was manipulation. It was coercive. There was a threat assigned to it. There was, like when we are able to actually identify, I use like the kind of idea of a cogs in a grandfather clock, all the we understand the patterns. It's not just this vague thing of like, well, I don't know, it just doesn't feel good. It's like, no, this is why it doesn't feel good. I have a name for what is happening. It's not just my perspective. It's not just because I'm overly sensitive. It's not just because my mom talked to me or whatever. No, this is a behavior that is identifiable and nameable.
Yeah.
What just happened? There's
Yeah.
so much power in that. There's so much clarity in that. And that's why I've been so passionate about putting that together for people.
if people wanted to come to you and utilize resources, where would you recommend they start? Because we're going to put stuff on our show notes so
Yeah.
they can come find you, but where would you recommend them starting if they're listening to this
Yeah.
and they're recognizing and feeling things? Is
Yeah.
it the three big
My
things you mentioned?
100%, 100%. I have a journey, client journey that I hope people will go on, whether that client journey, whether it's actually with me or with their own provider. I'm a strong advocate. If you already have a provider that is your safe place, that knows your story is and knows you, continue working with them. If you get stuck, you can always have a one off with me. That's part of the reason I created my offerings the way that I did. But my video series is free. And it's probably an hour and a half worth of content broken up into 3 videos. There's a workbook. There's a lot of great stuff in there. And that's a good place to start. And quite honestly, a lot of people have told me my stuff is like collegiate level as far as like the level of work and information. So I would encourage any listeners, give yourself time. A lot of people, most people want to watch the videos 2 and 3 times to let it all soak in and to do the exercises. And sometimes what I'll encourage people to do is watch them straight through So that sometimes some of the questions that come up as you're like watching one video and keep you from being able to sit and be present with the worksheet in that with that one video, go to the next one, binge it, right? And then go back through it again and then go do the worksheets. And a lot of people also like to combine that with listening to my podcast. I haven't put out any new ones yet this year, but I think I had like 30 episodes or something like that from last year. And that's just a really great healing way to hear a lot of other people experiencing the same types of things. And it often helps some of the pieces come into focus a little bit. So those are two things that you could start doing like right now for free, right? And then there are other offerings that people can do. And again, whether they end up working with me or whether they do those offerings and then process those things with their own therapist or their own coach, there are a number of different levels of things and ways to help them learn the different things that they can learn. A lot of top professionals, like a lot of people know Dr. Ramani, who I love. I don't know her personally yet. I'm going to put that out there yet, but I just went through a training of hers and over again, what we hear is how important the psychoeducation is in this part of a person's journey. So I love providing that education piece. And then again, letting your therapist work with you around the trauma piece and around maybe EMDR or whatever that stuff is that you're going to come alongside of to provide the non-psychoeducational pieces. But that, yeah, absolutely. That's a long answer, sorry, to a short question. Free video series is where I would recommend. To me, it's the foundation, establishing what I call shared meaning. That is the foundation for everything else that I do.
I love that you just spoke to giving them permission to stay with whoever they're working with. And we
Mhm.
also know not all professionals have a knowledge base and an understanding.
Correct.
Really quick, I just want to plug with ABSATs. Sarah, I know
Yes.
next week,
Yeah.
you're going to be teaching some of this to professionals through the ABSATs organization. And so if you're listening to this and you're working with a professional counselor or a coach who has not been trained in ABSATs, tell them about it.
Yes.
ABSATs is doing such beautiful work. I love, Sarah, that they're pulling this into it. Both Sarah and I are on the board of directors for ABSATs.
Hmm.
And one of the areas that I am really excited to see ABSATs continue to grow in is around things that have to do with abuse and gaslighting. And so
Yeah.
where they are bringing this in, I look at ABSATs as the gold standard for treating betrayal trauma. And
100%.
so invite your whoever you're working with. If they are not trained in this, go get trained from Sarah, go get trained from ABSATs
Hmm.
so that you can, because I love that you said if you already have someone you feel safe with, you don't have to lose that safety net. But as a professional, if there's work out there and new knowledge and new training that's coming out, I want to be part of it. I want to learn about it
Hmm.
so I can offer that to my clients. So you probably, hopefully, have a therapist or a coach who is open to wanting to know more. And it's when my clients bring me something that is really exciting for me to then be able to learn more.
Yeah. I mean, that's what keeps us in best practices, right?
Yep.
Is when our clients come to us and say, hey, this feels really important to me. Do you know about this? And we're like, no, but now I want to, right? Like, I feel like it's either that or no. And I already have my specialty, but let me reach out to this person and we can collaborate to get you. Like, to me, that should be one of those two answers, should be pretty much every helping professional's answer. Like, no, but I want to learn, or like, because I've had people come to me wanting to know about intimacy, anorexia, and I'm like, I don't really know very much about that at all. I'm the gaslighting specialist. Here are 5 names of people that you could work with. That is their jam. Like, you want to work with gaslighting? I'm your girl. You want to work with, right? Like, and there have been other times I'm like, no, I want to learn that. But yeah, ABSATs, go get the training. If you don't have it, ask your therapist. And honestly, can I just touch on that for a second too, Alana? Because not that we're trying to like fire therapists or coaches left and right, But I also think if you're not getting the treatment that if you're listening to this podcast and you're feeling like, I don't feel like my therapist or my coach gets me, I don't feel like they get this piece and this piece feels huge to me, whether it's this podcast or another episode that you listen to, like you get to advocate for yourself. There's nothing wrong with you saying, okay, well, thank you for taking me this far. I need to find the person that can take me to the next level. There's nothing wrong or bad with that. Like you get to do that if they're not able to meet you with what you need to heal when something feels really important to you. That goes back to trusting your gut. If your gut is saying, I know this is the next thing for me that I need to work on, like trust it. That's another thing. Sorry, full circle. This is super important. I want your people to hear this. Our gut is always for us. That's one way you can always know whether your gut is talking or not. It's always kind. It's always loving, right? Like it's always going to be in our best interest, the way that it's responding. So if your gut is telling you this feels good, this feels right, this feels like the next thing, like something deep in you is resonating and saying, yes, like you get to advocate for yourself and there's nothing wrong with that.
I love that you just said that. It's so important. I literally, right before I got in here, once a month, I do a free coaching and for women who are in that place of cognitive dissonance of should I stay or should I go? And
Mhm.
that's exactly what a woman brought to me was she's been working with a therapist for years and all they're focusing on is her lack of communication in the relationship, completely missing the betrayal piece. And there's this sense of loyalty to the professional
Yeah.
that they've been with for a while. I am right there with you in that part of why I do what I do also is to help educate clients to know what they can advocate for themselves for because there's just beautiful information like what you're doing. The work that you're doing is just incredible.
Thank you.
If professionals aren't willing to open their minds and learn and use it to help clients,
Find
well,
one that will.
Sarah, I don't have words. I'm so excited that my clients are going to be able to hear this. I'm excited
Mhm.
that you listeners who have sat with us in this have got this information. And my little reminder on this is take what works for you today and where you're at and come back to
Mhm.
this. So
Mhm.
because as we're at
Mhm.
different parts in the journey, you're going to pull different pieces from this. And my brain is going
Yep.
through clients and going, oh, I want them to have this piece. And oh, this client, this piece.
Yep.
So I feel very richly fed. Sarah, do you have
Good.
any final thoughts or things you just want to leave with our listeners?
Just to piggyback what you just said, my favorite quote, my life quote is the Maya Angelou quote, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And that's where we're at. Like each of us, we're in this place where we are trying to do better and just to be super compassionate with yourself. I think we deserve to be loved well. And I think it starts with us giving ourselves permission to love ourselves well. And so I'm just 100%. I love what you just said. And so I just wanted to piggyback on that. Like, yes, yes, all the things, all the grace for this impossibly hard journey that none of us chose, right? All the grace. Yeah, sure.
You. Thank you for
Mhm.
taking your time. Thank you for sharing your brain. I wish I
Thanks for
could have
having me.
all of it, but this has been just a real treat. So,
Yeah.
first, thanks for hanging out with us this week, and we look forward to seeing all of you next week.
so because Sarah is just awesome, she has created a professional's manual to help support the therapist or certified coach you are working with. So for those of you who wish to take her signature program, Deconstructing Gaslighting, it gives us as professionals all the resources that you, the client, will go through to help support you along the way. Her course is no joke. It is not something that you just listen to on a walk. It is absolutely going to change your life. I am using it with clients already, and I'm loving the ability to check in with them, be on the same page with what they're learning, and coach them where their brains are keeping them stuck and moving through the program. If you're interested in this, check out the link in the show notes or head over to sarahmoralescoaching.com. And don't be afraid to request that your one-on-one professional be equally informed about this and has access to the manual for professionals to best support you. Thanks again, y'all, and continue to choose healing, choose recovery, and choose you. Take care, everybody.